Welcome to the Social Exchange Podcast. The following is a conversation with Dr. Mark Goulston. Mark has a number of accomplishments and talents, many of which we discuss in the interview and some of which we don't. There are going to be many things you may find profound about his work, in suicide prevention, for example, or being an FBI hostage negotiation trainer, or his 9 authored or co-authored books, one of them called Just Listen, which is a bestseller translated into 28 languages. Or maybe you will be fascinated by the fact that he had breakfast with Larry King every day for years, before the pandemic and before Larry's death. Or that he outsmarted O.J. Simpson's attorney, F. Lee Bailey, when he questioned Mark during the O.J. trial. And if none of that impresses you, then maybe you'll be impressed that the movie Superbad was filmed in his home. It's not something we talked about on camera, but that is actually true. To be serious, his list of his accomplishments and skills just goes on. My fascination with Mark centers on his ability to functionalize and explain the use of radical empathy when working with human beings. Many of us in the helping profession understand empathy and are empaths. Yet, so often the empathy isn't fully realized by the person we're working with. Maybe that's because we have an agenda beyond the person we're helping, even if it's a good one, or that we seem to understand them on a logical level, but not completely at an experiential level. Or maybe you do possess this skill to reach people even in the depths of despair so that they feel completely understood, maybe for the first time in their lives. But you can't quite put into words the way that you're able to do this in a way that another helping person could replicate it. Mark has both of these skills, the ability to deeply reflect other people's experiences, to see the world through their eyes, and the ability to demonstrate, explain, and teach his method of doing so. This is a process that he calls surgical empathy. This is something we talked about in some detail in the talk. I'm going to leave it there and let Mark explain who he is and what his calling is and how he got there in his own words. So I hope you'll enjoy this talk with Dr. Mark Goulston. Welcome to the Social Exchange. My guest today spent 2 decades as a UCLA professor of psychiatry. He's a former FBI and police hostage negotiator and trainer, and international trainer focused on suicide prevention. He's a Marshall Goldsmith 100 coaches executive coach, and he's the author or co-author of 9 books. His book, Just Listen, being translated into 28 languages and becoming the top book on listening in the world. He hosts the highly ranked podcast, My Wakeup Call, where he conversationally interviews people like Larry King, Jordan Peterson, Ken Blanchard, Esther Wojcicki, and Marshall Goldsmith about their purpose and calling and their origin story and wake-up calls that led them there. Dr. Mark Goulston, thank you so much for being here. It's my pleasure to have you.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. Looking forward to this. And you told me about your community, and it sounds like a wonderful community.
And I can't wait to ask you what you've asked so many of your podcast guests and probably many of your clients or people who you've consulted. What is your purpose and calling? And can you tell me your origin story and some of the wake-up calls that got you there?
God, that sounds like a familiar podcast.
Yeah, I made that up.
You made that. Well, I think my calling is to heal the world one conversation at a time, because I think it's possible to have healing conversations that start you on the road to healing. And it's something I did with some of the suicidal patients I saw over 25 years. And I was just paying forward what was done to me. Because I guess my origin story, well, I guess the pivotal one is I dropped out of medical school twice for untreated depression or depression that wasn't treated fully. And what was happening is I was highlighting all my books, hoping I could hold on to the information. So they were all filled with yellow, those markers, but I wasn't holding on to it. So the first time I dropped out, I took a blue collar job, loved it, still miss it, because it was just so simple. There was no stress. Work during the day, at night I could just relax. And so my mind came back to me at probably a blue collar level of functioning. So I came back, and after several months, my mind, flipped out on me again. But the second time I dropped out, the school wanted to kick me out because I didn't know it, but they lost matching funds when someone takes a leave of absence. And I could understand, not wanting to waste more money on me. So I met with the dean of the school, good guy, but, focused on that. And I think he didn't tell me that he was going to ask the school to have me leave. But I think he was worried that when I heard that, I could do something self-destructive. And I'm not sure I would have, but I got a call from the dean of students. And he called me and he said, I got a letter from the dean. You better come in here. And he says, here, read the letter. And the letter said, I met with Mr. Goulston. I wasn't a doctor. We talked about alternate professions, and I'm advising the promotions committee that he be asked to withdraw. And I said to the dean of students, I said, what does this mean? And he said in an Irish Catholic Bostonian accent, Mark, you've been kicked out. You're out of here. And Zach, it was like a body punch. And I'm not really a religious person, but it's almost like I caved in and I felt something wet on my cheekbones, and I thought it was blood. I kept touching my cheekbones, looking at my hands, and it was tears. And but I think the raw vulnerability got through to him. In addition to, I'll share something else with you. But he said, Mark, you didn't mess up, but you are messed up. But if you got unmessed up, I think the school would be glad they gave you a second chance. And when he said that, I could feel that it was tears that I was feeling, not blood. And it was from his compassion. And then he said to me, and even if you don't get unmessed up, even if you don't become a doctor, even if you don't do anything the rest of your life, I'd be proud to know you, because you have a streak of kindness and goodness in you that we don't grade in medical school. We should, but we don't. And you don't know how much the world needs that goodness or kindness. And you won't know it till you're 35. But you have to make it till you're 35. And you deserve to be on this planet. And you're going to let me help you. And it's interesting because I think what happened is, and I think that was a healing conversation. And if he had said to me, if I can help you, give me a call, I probably would have gone back to my apartment and I might not be here today.
Sure.
But because he saw the raw vulnerability, he said, you're going to let me help you. And as I now replay it in my mind, I think what happened, and if you're listening in, maybe you can relate to this. It's that, when you feel that gut punch that you can't take it anymore, it almost feels like your mind comes undone. It's almost like a Rubik's Cube that gets all messed up and there's no way it's ever going to come back to normal. But I think what happened is when I felt that gut punch, it's like he put his hand underneath and said, you're going to let me help you. And so the fact that he saw value in me, he saw a future for me, he was willing to stand up to the whole medical school for me at his own, risk. It did something. So and I think what happened is I was able to surrender.
Yeah.
And I remember when he said that, you're going to let me help you, I couldn't even face him. I mean, I was sobbing, but I remember I lifted up my left hand and I said, I think I'd like that. And I've been trying to figure out, because I hadn't met with him that much in my life. I mean, I didn't like to burden people with my problems. And I was trying to figure out, how did he see goodness? How did he see a future for me? And I think I solved one of the missing pieces. The first time I dropped out, which they allow you to do, I wrote a poem. And the poem was published in something called the Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry. And the poem's title was Lament for the Old. But I'll read you the last paragraph of it, because I'm 3 times the age of when I wrote this thing. So the last paragraph, and he saw this, was, I then took the time to get to know some of these marvelous people 3 times my age, which is what I am, who offered a wealth of experience that spanned hundreds of years. What was so obviously missing was someone to share the fullness of the past, to help relieve the loneliness of the future, and maybe someone to give a damn when they died. So I'm guessing that he saw that. I'm a medical student, and when I dropped out the first time, but what was interesting is I then paid it forward. I took a year off, went to work at the Menninger Foundation Psychiatric Institute, which was in Topeka, Kansas. Now it's, I think, all through the Midwest, and I think it's based in Houston. And I found a way to connect with schizophrenic farm boys. I grew up in a suburb of Boston. I don't know anything about schizophrenic farm boys, but in some way I found a way to connect with them. And so, and I came back, finished med school, then went on and did psychiatry at UCLA. But there's sort of an irony in the last 8 months or something. I've started a company during the pandemic called Michelangelo Mindset. And what that means is there's a quote attributed to Michelangelo where he said, "I saw the angel in the marble and I carved until I set it free." So Michelangelo Mindset is a way of looking out into the world and seeing something clearly and getting rid of what clutters it. So I think what happened is when I saw suicidal patients, I found the hope that they couldn't feel. And I cleared away things until they could feel the hope inside them. And there's actually a name that I gave to the process called surgical empathy.
I love that name, by the way. It's one of those names, and I understand it, that I wish I came up with.
Well, I'm glad I did, because it is sort of memorable because it juxtaposes something soft with something direct.
Yes.
And actually the way it works is if you've been suicidal and you've been suicidal for more than a few moments, what happens is you attach to death to take away the pain. So death is compassionate to hopelessness and pain that won't go away. It's like the sirens calling the sailors onto the rocks. And even when it goes away consciously, you tuck it in your back pocket saying, well, if worse comes to worse, I can always end it all. And but what I discovered is that when people can feel felt by you, which is different than feeling understood,
yes,
they may let go of the death that understands them and attach to your compassion. So if you've heard my stuff, you've probably heard the anecdote I'm going to share with you.
Please do, though. Every anecdote I've heard that you've shared so far is something that has stuck with me.
Well, the thing, before I leave the Michelangelo mindset, I finished med school, psychiatry, training at UCLA. And then one of my subspecialty areas was suicide prevention. And one of my mentors was a psychologist named Dr. Ed Schneidman, who was one of the leaders in that field. And he would refer me still suicidal people. But what's really gotten to me recently and emotionally is the dean of students was Michelangelo, and I was his David in the future. So in essence, I paid forward what he did for me. I saw futures, goodness, and worthiness inside my patients, and I wouldn't let go of it until they saw it and felt it. And there's one anecdote that kind of stopped Michaela Peterson in her tracks. So what would happen is Dr. Schneidman would go up in the inpatient unit at UCLA, and there'd be some patients that needed to be discharged, but they were still suicidal. They weren't acutely suicidal, but you can't keep them there forever. And so there was one person that he'd seen, we'll call her Nancy. He met with her, and a lot of my practice were referrals from Dr. Schneidman, and it was always the same way he'd refer. I'd get a page, a phone call, and he'd say, Mark, this is Ed. I'm with this lovely young woman. I'm with this handsome young man. They're in a lot of pain, Mark. You could help them, see them. And so then they were discharged, and they couldn't be discharged unless someone agreed to see them, and I was that person. So there was one person he referred to me who I'll call Nancy, and she'd made 2 or 3 attempts prior to my seeing her, and she'd been in the hospital 2 to 3 months every year for a few years. Back then, people stayed in the hospital for a long time. And I didn't think I was helping her. I was seeing her for about 6 months, and I didn't think, she was showing up, but I didn't really think I was helping her. On the other hand, I wasn't trying to control her. And I used to moonlight once a month at one of the state hospitals near Los Angeles. And moonlighting means I covered for the psychiatrist. I'd do admissions. I'd go write orders, go onto the units, and et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes you don't sleep for 24 hours or more, and you get a little dissociated. And so there was one weekend that happened, and I saw Nancy on a Monday, and she came in, and she rarely made eye contact with me. She wasn't catatonic, but she was always looking a little bit to the left or the right. And I sat down, and I'm with her, and as I'm looking out into the room at her, all the color in the room turned to black and white. So I'm looking out, and it's a black and white picture. And I thought, wow, I'm having a stroke or a seizure. And then I did a neurologic exam on myself because I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm tapping my knees and I'm tapping my elbows and I'm looking at my index finger. It wasn't rude because she wasn't looking at me. And I realized I'm all here. I'm not having a stroke or seizure. And then I got these chills. And I thought, I don't know what's happened, but I'm looking out at the world, feeling the way she feels inside. And it got colder and colder. I started shaking a little bit. And then because I was sleep deprived, I blurted something out that normally I wouldn't. And I said, Nancy, I didn't know it was so bad. And I can't help you kill yourself. But if you do, I will still think well of you. I'll miss you. Maybe I'll understand why you had to get out of the pain. And I thought, did I think that or did I say that? And then I thought, I think I said it. I'm screwed. I just gave her permission. And that was really the first time she looked into my eyes. And she not only looked into my eyes, she held on to them, kind of like I'm looking into your eyes through the camera lens. And I looked at her and I said, what are you thinking? Because I thought she was going to say, thank you for understanding. I'm overdue. And she looked at me and she said, if you can really understand why I might have to kill myself to get out of the pain, maybe I won't need to. Then she smiled. And then I looked into her eyes and I held on to them because I had this kind of contact. And I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm not going to give you any treatments unless you ask me for it because you've been through everything. You might say, I think we need meds, change meds, whatever. Would that be okay? And she smiled slightly with a smile that said, keep talking. I'm intrigued. And I said, what I am going to do is I'm going to find you wherever you are. And I'm going to keep you company there. Because I don't want you to be alone there anymore. Would that be okay? And then, not unlike my eyes watering when the dean of students connected with me, her eyes watered. And so that became a turning point. And something that I'm trying to teach the world now is that if you can let go of your agenda, if you can let go of checking boxes, and if you can look into people's eyes and you're looking for where it hurts most, or how it hurts most, or if they're angry, what they're angry about. When you look into someone's eyes with a non-judgmental desire to just go wherever they are and keep them company, they will lean back towards you. And then what happens is when they feel you next to them in hell, and here's a little neuropsychology, they get a huge surge of oxytocin. They feel emotional connection. They're not alone anymore. Surge of oxytocin counteracts high cortisol. And high cortisol is something that when you're stressed out, it can trigger something in your brain called an amygdala hijack, where you're not thinking at all. You're just reacting, fight, flight, freeze. And so I'm trying to teach the world now. In fact, 2 years ago, I spoke in Moscow because 5 of my books are bestsellers in Russia. And I spoke along with a Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman. He wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. He has a new book out called Noise. But I got similar billing to him because 5 of my books have done well in Russia. There were 3 of us. There was Daniel Kahneman, myself, and a fellow named Joseph Pine, who wrote a great book called The Experience Economy. And my talk was called Change Everything You Know About Communication. And there are about 1,000 Russian businessmen, managers, leaders. And I can send you a link to a video clip from part of my introduction. And what I said to them is, I'm going to change everything you know about communication, because right now you're listening to me. You're business people. And if I check certain boxes and I give you a few stories, you'll give me your mind for an hour. And then I switched to my FM voice and I said, but if I focus on what you're listening for, and I get what you're listening for without you telling me, and I deliver on it, you'll give me everything. And then I said to them, and then I'm going to pivot this to your audience. I said, if you're businessmen, what you're listening for, or your managers, you're listening for a way to get greater positive results, because that's how you get a promotion or a raise. Is that true? Da. And then I said, and you're looking for a way to get those results that's less stressful, because you're all drinking too much, you're eating too much. Is that true? Da. And then I said, and what you're most listening for is that I will give you a way that's doable by you immediately to get those results that's less stressful. And you don't have to buy a book. I haven't even written this book yet, and I still haven't. And there's no course. So if I can give you immediately doable by you tips that will help you get better results with less stress, it'll be worth the money you paid to come here in a day of your time. Is that true? And they go, da. I said, sit down. I got to give a presentation here. And I'll share I'm going to give you the experience.
Please.
So right now you're listening to me, and you're giving me a long leash. And I hope I've been relatively, relevant. But you're checking boxes, is he giving information, about listening, communication. But underneath you listening to me, here's what you're listening for. See if I get it. And if I get it, see if you feel something different. Okay. Let me get this. What you're listening for is that your listeners, be they people in recovery, be they professionals, they trust you and have confidence in you. And you want to give them value because you want to honor their trust and confidence in you. And the last thing you want to do is waste their time or insult them. So what you're listening for are guests who can give your listeners, be they in recovery or maybe should go into recovery, or professionals, you're listening for something that will be relevant to them, immediately helpful, something they can use to make their lives better, because you want to honor the trust and confidence they have in you, because you don't take that lightly. Is any of that true?
It's true enough for me to sign on the dotted line, for sure.
Yeah. And could you feel the difference when I got what you were listening for?
I wanted so badly to say no, but yes, for sure. And I didn't expect you to, the thing that you got so, which is so salient and true, is that I enjoy being able to be a trusted person to deliver information. You honed in on that and hooked it right away. I didn't tell you that either. I mean, you could maybe surmise from the fact that I do this, and there's not a ton of money in podcasting. It's not like I reached out to you, but yes, you got it.
And one of the things I do in my podcast, which I'm going to do in yours, I'm going to talk to the third wall. I'm going to talk to your listeners. Because if you're a professional, when you're there with a client, if you can pause, and I know you have to check boxes, I know you have to fill in all kinds of protocols, and I feel for you because you're so focused on checking the boxes, making sure they meet criteria, that sometimes you don't connect with them the way you want to, because that's why you went into the field. But if you can take some moments and just pause and imagine, what are they listening for? And if you're a profession in the recovery field, what they're listening for is a reason to believe that this time it'll be different. This time they won't relapse. But they have a history of a lot of relapses. And they're listening for, tell me something that I can hold on to so that we don't just detox me and I have good intentions and I make promises and then I'm out and I'm using again. Give me something I can hold on to, because while I'm in recovery, while I'm in an inpatient setting, you can watch over me, but when I'm left on my own, I'm a wacko job. So give me something to hold on to so I don't relapse, or so I call a sponsor or whatever. So if you're a professional, if you can just pause and just be curious what they're listening for, and you look into their eyes and you're being curious to understand how they feel, and maybe feel it with them like I did with Nancy, you're going to feel them lean into you. And if you're someone who's in recovery or needing to go to recovery and you're listening to this podcast, what you're listening for is, well, I'll share it with you. When I've spoken to people, when I've spoken about suicide, I actually wrote an article after Kate Spade and I'm blocking his name.
Bourdain?
Yeah, Anthony Bourdain. Yeah. So they died by suicide, I think, in the same week or two. And I wrote a piece called "Why People Kill Themselves. It's Not Depression." And so it got 500,000 reads in about 2 weeks.
Before you go on, I wrote a similar article shortly after they died. I'm interested to see if it's I had the right beam on it or a similar one.
Well, what I said is, there's hundreds of millions, maybe in the billions of people who are depressed who don't kill themselves. People who lose their jobs, lose their marriages. And I said, those contribute to it. I said, but having been the specialist in this land of people feeling suicidal, one of the things I recognize that nearly all of them feel at the end is despair. And if you break the word despair into DESPAIR, they feel unpaired, hopeless, without a future, without hope, helpless, powerless, useless, worthless, meaningless, purposeless. And when they all line up like a terrible slot machine, pointless to go on, And that's when they pair with death to take the pain away. But when they feel felt and they can pair with that feeling, they can let go of pairing with nothing. And there's a observation that I've made that pain is pain. Suffering is feeling alone in that pain. And when you take away the aloneness of that pain, which recovery sponsors, the community helps, suffering that you can't live with becomes pain that you can. So that's one of the things that I believe. I think it's the community. It's not necessarily the 12 steps. It's nice that you have a framework, but it's the community. It's the oxytocin. It's the feeling cared about. And I love the way AA groups are run because people aren't giving you advice. They're not telling you treatment. There's not crosstalk. So it's a very wise program in which people can just share and be heard and hopefully feel felt.
I should tell you, I'm not an AA guy. I have my problems with AA, and I'm not a big AA guy. But that's the one thing I have to give them. It's like in a in a time when people are struggling to find connection with other human beings, it's hard to knock some sort of an operation that's lay-led and gives you that.
Well, I'm guessing that neither of us are fans for the same reason, because too many of these things spawn proselytizers, and so I think the spirit of it, just like anything, often turns into people who, and one of the reasons they're proselytizing you, they're not bad people. Every time they try to convince you, they're trying to convince themselves.
Yeah. So there's no real listening going on there either way.
Right. So
I have questions.
Good, because I'm giving you back the leash.
Good. No, but you hit on a few things, and one of them, I told you this before we started recording. One of the main reasons I wanted to speak with you, there are countless, is that you have an ability to not only practice this sort of connection and surgical empathy, as you call it, but describe it in a way that even a lay person can understand. To some extent, everyone I know in this profession, in a helping profession, or parents, or people who stand to gain something from helping another human being, sort of know a couple things. They know that they're supposed to be compassionate to some extent, and they know that there are better and worse ways to go about having a conversation with somebody that they're worried about.
Can I give you some tactics? Because a lot of people will say, well, clearly this Dr. Goulston has had a lot of experience, but I'm just a regular person caring about someone who's falling through the cracks, and I can't reach them and they won't open up to me. So can I offer a few tactics?
Would you? But if you could hold this question in your mind while you do it, well, okay, two things, and we can table them for a moment. There's something beyond simply listening or following a script that people need to do. There's a certain emotional level that you have to have, a level of humility that you have to be able to go beyond, as you did, convention, to get through to another human being, and not so that they can listen to your agenda, but so that they can be felt by you. That's a very difficult thing to describe, and I've found that people who are talented at doing this themselves have difficulty explaining exactly what they're doing to other people. I'm one of them, probably not anywhere near to a degree as you are, but I have found that I'm a go-to person for similar situations. And people will ask, on one hand, people will say, well, you're doing the wrong shit. You're breaking all the rules. You shouldn't be doing this. And the same people will say, I need you because I don't know exactly what you're doing. And I've found myself, I have a difficult time explaining exactly what the hell it is I'm doing. So the two questions that we can table are, have you always had this intuition to be able to exercise this phenomenon that I'm talking about? And has it always come naturally that you can explain what's going on in some way that is digestible for people?
I don't think I've always had it, because I think before my medical school experience, I used to hide behind sarcasm and cynicism. In retrospect, I could see it was really protective. But I think at the time, I'm an introvert. It was a way to be a little bit of the edgy class clown. And I've never meant to hurt anyone, but I could be very sarcastic. And, when I grew up, it was kind of trendy to be sarcastic and cynical, anti-Vietnam and all that.
Yeah.
But I think what happened is when that dean of students, just saw the raw vulnerability underneath, it sort of flipped the channel, flipped a switch inside me. I'll share another anecdote. I'm not sure that this shared this with Michaela Peterson, but I'll share it with you. I remember when I had to tell my father I was dropping out. And my father, may he rest in peace. I mean, my parents are both gone, but he was the person at his company who sort of did a lot of the hiring and firing. And so people were afraid of him. I think he was a straight shooter, but he could be very, very serious. He also had the capacity that if you made an excuse, he'd roll his eyes. You're like, oh, here we go again. Mm. And I have two older brothers who, and I'm the youngest of three, who actually flunked out of college, I think, as a way of sort of getting back at him, getting back at him in a way that only hurt them. And they both finished and they both do fine and we're all close. And so I remember when I had to tell him I was dropping out, and I had to tell him in a certain amount of time, otherwise we would lose the tuition. And I remember I met with him, and again, this is a tough guy, and he's seated across me. And I looked at him and I said, I'm leaving medical school. And he looked at me and he said, what'd you do, flunk out like your brothers? And I felt this jolt through me. I said, no. He said, wait, you're leaving and you're not flunking out? I don't get it. And then I looked at him. I said, I'm highlighting all my books. It's not going through. But, he was very practical. And he said, well, yeah, but you're still passing. I still don't get it. And then I said, it's just not going in. And then he said, and then he could be very strong. And then he started to talk, and I just shut up and I looked down, and he said, so we're agreed, you're going to stay and you'll get a tutor. And what I'm thinking to myself is, if I go back, something bad's going to happen. And he's just going on and on. And so he says that, and I remember, and this was, I think, the most powerful moment of my entire life, because I knew if I went back, something bad might happen. So I looked up and I leaned forward like I'm leaning into your eyes, and my eyes were just tearing. And I just said, you don't seem to understand. I'm afraid. And I just stared at him. And then when I spoke my truth, more tears came down my cheek. And I was taking a chance. I mean, he could have been like General Patton, say, come on, man up. But I knew deep down inside my parents that they loved all of us. Just, they grew up in the Depression. And I remember staring at him. And tears rolling down my cheeks, and I wouldn't take my eyes off him. And then I remember he clenched his fist, and he looked down and he said, "Do what you need to do. We'll help you in whatever way we can." And that's when I realized the raw power. Yeah, you're taking chances. Sometimes it was a chance, but the raw power of just being totally raw and vulnerable. And I was raw and vulnerable. I wasn't whining. I wasn't complaining. I was just raw. And what I realized, there's a huge power in that. In fact, when one of the things that I'm doing now, someone who's become a close friend of mine named Jason Reed, his 14-year-old son died by suicide 3.5 years ago. And his son left a couple suicide notes. One of them said, "Tell my story." So Jason put in over $200,000, and there's a documentary called Tell My Story. You can find it. If you look up Tell My Story film, you'll see the trailer. I think you can actually see the documentary. And Jason went up and down the West Coast because he thinks it was his fault. And so we do presentations. We've done them around the world. There's an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. We've done 2 global Zoom calls with them. And there's another younger organization called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. And what he talks about is when you're a problem solver and you're dealing with someone who's really depressed, they can't come where you are. And he gave me this great observation. He says, when you say to ask your kid, "How you doing?" and they say, "Great," they're usually good. But when they say they're fine, they're not. And so when we go, he shares his story. And if people go to Mark Goulston YouTube, my YouTube channel, we did a live presentation to, I think, about 400 entrepreneurs in this organization called EO, Entrepreneur Organization. So if you go to Mark Goulston YouTube, you'll see our presentation there. You'll see the trailer from Tell My Story. He'll share. It always gets to me because every time he relives the incident of of being on vacation with his wife and thinking everything is great, and he gets a text message from his son saying, "Don't blame yourself. I'm so sorry. Goodbye." And he started screaming, and he called home to his mother-in-law, and he said, "Go find Ryan." And she went up into the attic, and he'd hung himself.
You couldn't write a worse, that's the worst story a parent could imagine.
Oh, yeah. And he shares that, and about the, it wasn't easy getting back from Mexico on vacation. And then his son was on a ventilator, brain dead, and all these things. And he shares that story. And then he hands it over to me, and I share some tips if you're worried about someone. So maybe I'll give you two sets of tips that you can use.
Excellent.
One we've created called FIDO parenting, FIDO. So that makes it memorable. And what we're recommending is that families have dinner together, because there's a lot of research that shows that helps future mental health of your children if you have dinner together. And then after that, either the mom or the dad goes through the FIDO, and he says, "What was something that we felt upset about today?" And he goes first, or she goes first. I is the impulse. What did it make you want to do? D is, what did you do? O is the outcome. How'd that work out for you? So in the presentation, I pretend to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, what I was upset about is one of my people, made excuses about something. My impulse was to yell at them, and, because I couldn't stand the excuses. But what I did is I just walked around the building a couple times, calmed down, and I was able to have a conversation with this person, find out what was really going on and fix it. And the outcome is that was a lot better than if I'd gotten angry. So we recommend you're doing this. And what we're discovering is marriages are being helped because moms and dads, husbands and wives, sometimes afterwards will go upstairs and say, "What I was feeling upset about was you, but I didn't want to bring it up in front of the kids. So that was my impulse. But what I am doing is I'm bringing it up now. this thing that you did that you said you wouldn't do, please stop.
This is something about you come up with these sort of cognitive sorts of therapeutic games that are useful in and of themselves, but always seem to have these second order outcomes that you wouldn't expect. So this one is that there's a conversation after the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So interesting.
Yeah. And then, but here's the thing, if you're really worried about a teenager or a spouse, and there's also a video of this on my YouTube. You might have to search to find it. The other one's one of my more recent YouTubes. But this one, four prompts. And so if you're worried about one of your teenagers, do not start a face-to-face, heart-to-heart thing unless they initiate it. Teenagers, it's like nails on a chalkboard. Sure. They hate it. But when you're doing an activity with them, driving, doing an errand, you do have the ability to say, most of us parents are really worried about our kids. So do it when you're not face-to-face, but when you're doing something, driving or whatever, and say, most of us parents, we know what's happening, and the schools are opening, they're closing, the masks and everything. And we're worried. Can I run some things by you? Because I'm one of those parents who's worried. And hopefully if you tee it up that way, that your teenagers say, okay, what is it, Mom? What is it, Dad? So here are the 4 prompts. You say, at its absolute worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? Pretty awful. Here's the surgical empathy. Pretty awful or very awful? Okay, very, very awful. Second prompt, when you're feeling that, how alone do you feel? Pretty alone. Pretty alone or all alone? Okay, already, all alone. Third prompt, take me to the last time you felt that. What? Yeah, was it 2:30 in the morning because we heard you shuffling around a few nights ago? It sounds like you weren't in bed, or when was it? And something that most therapists know, and you'll know intuitively, is that when someone describes something so clearly that you as the listener can see it with your eyes, they re-experience the feelings. The more general it is, the less they experience. Yeah, it was 2:30. I was walking around. Yeah, what happened? I couldn't get to sleep. Then what happened? I told you I'm walking around and it just wasn't working. Then what happened? So you're not irritating. You say, tell me more. I didn't know whether to kick the wall or punch the wall. Then what happened? Well, I looked for some of your sleeping pills, couldn't find them. Then what happened? The sun rose. And that's like the third prompt. Get them to get it all out because they re-feel it. And then the fourth one is you look them directly in the eye, because hopefully you've earned that connection. You say, look at me, like the dean of students said to me. And you say, next time you feel that way or you're heading in that direction, do whatever it takes to get your mom or your dad or my undivided attention. Because we get stuff in our head. We're distracted. We're doing all kinds of things, but there's nothing more important to either of us than giving you our undivided attention when you're feeling that awful, so you don't feel that alone.
What's going on with the success of that method? I mean, it sounds like that is somebody who now, when they experience an event like they felt when you had them revisit the event, they associate that with somebody who's understanding where they are and somebody who's had response to.
Yeah, because what happens is when, first of all, there's 4 steps, and so you're not going directly into tell me about the last time. It's the layers of an onion. But what happens is when they start to re-experience it, it's kind of like where I was with the dean of students when he said you've been kicked out. It's almost like they're beginning to crater into the vulnerability, like I felt with my dad when I said, I'm afraid. But the key is, if you're listening in, don't get scared by their crying. You're letting them cry. If they start to cry and you get freaked out, and you might, then they're going to say, I'm not going to open up to you. So I know this is counterintuitive, but there's many ways in which we cry. We cry with frustration. We cry with relief. But the crying here, if they start to cry, it's because they feel less alone. They begin to feel paired with you.
And so, I mean, after that conversation, insofar as this is useful, do you find that it's useful because this thing doesn't happen again, or do you find that it's?
Oh, no. Are you kidding? You're a teenager. It happens every week.
So but the point is, again, now they're associated this emotion that they feel with something that they can a concept they can wrap their arms around, which is also paired with somebody who has a level of compassion for them and actually understands them and can hear them. Right.
Yeah. If you go to the EO presentation, I showed a couple of graphics, and I explained them, so you'll see the whole thing. But one graphic was called, sort of like how your personality forms. And the idea is that, when we're in the womb, we don't have any needs. Our wish is our mom's command. But then, when we're born, suddenly we're in pain. We're hungry. We poop in our diaper. And so the first graphic shows that as we go through life and we hit pain, we look back at mom or dad, mostly mom. And depending on how she attunes to us or connects with us, we internalize something. And there's 4 different ways. The second graphic shows there's 4 different ways when we look back and we're in pain, or if we have a big victory that we want to share with them, there's 4 ways they can respond. They can coddle us. They can criticize us. They can neglect us. I'm too busy, deal with it. And the 4th is they can be a loving teacher, mentor, coach. Loving means they tune into us, but then they're a teacher, mentor, coach. And the example I gave in the presentation in Lake Tahoe to this group was about the 1997 Masters tournament with Tiger Woods. So I know he's had kind of a complex life, but at that point, he was very close to his father, who was a loving teacher, mentor, coach. Some people will say he was a bit of a stage dad, but still, they had a close relationship.
Yeah.
And in the 1997 Masters tournament, Tiger goes out, shoots 40 on the front 9, which is not a good score. He comes back to his dad. In other words, he goes out in the unknown, he hits 40, comes back, and he basically says, I don't know what's going on. The wheels are falling off. And his dad says to him, because they've been through this kind of interaction many times, he said, Tiger, you've been there hundreds of times. Just do what you need to do. And Tiger went out and shot 18 under par, which has never been equaled until this year. And I don't think it's still equaled, because I don't think the person who won, I guess last year, Dustin Johnson, I don't think he shot 40 on the front 9 of the tournament.
Right.
But I think it's a good example of, that when you can, and see, that's what happened to me, is that, my parents were a little bit from the Depression age. And so they weren't, I think they were devoted to us, but they didn't know how to be a loving teacher, mentor, coach. I mean, it just wasn't their deal, but the dean was. So what happened is when I cratered and I sort of collapsed into him, he didn't say, call me if I can help you. He looked at me with a look that said, you ain't going anywhere. Plus you're worth saving. And what I said to this audience is, sometimes we can't change early on in our life if we're living with parents who either coddle us, are overly critical to us, or they're neglectful. And again, this is not to bash parents. This is to make sense of, why is it I feel so alone? Why is it I feel so confused? Why is it that when I hit a wall, I feel like falling apart? It's because when you reach inside, there's no there. Because when you internalize coddling, criticism, or neglect, there's no there. But it's never too late to find a mentor or another relative. And you can even do this while you're still living at home. I found that after I left home, and as a result, I've had 8 mentors. He was my first one. My last one was Larry King from CNN. We used to have breakfast every morning for 2 years before COVID. It was a quirky group. And then before him was a fellow named Warren Bennis, who's a big leadership guy. So I think I learned the power of mentors from that first dean. And I mentor now about 50 people from once or twice a week to every 6 years. So, the ones where I meet every 6 years, they say, "Is it okay if I call you a mentor?" I say, "Oh, what a cheap date. Yeah, I only saw you once." They said, "Yeah, but you told me one thing. It stuck with me forever." But it's a way of paying it forward. And mentors are great. I mean, and a mentor is different than a coach. I mean, they can be similar, but a coach is usually focused on your performance in a specific area. But a mentor is someone who's focused on helping you land in your future.
Yes.
John Wooden wrote a book on mentoring. I can't remember the title, but you can find it. But it was The Power of Mentoring. And by the way, you don't even have to know the people, because he talked about Abraham Lincoln being one of his mentors, Mother Teresa being a mentor, his wife, and they had people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton talking about him as a mentor. And it wasn't just about how they were as basketball players. And so I can't say enough about the value and power of mentors. And it was interesting, after Larry died, I thought, geez, where am I going to find another mentor? And then I just said, Mark, why don't you be the guy?
How has that transition been from mentee to mentor to someone?
Well, even while they were alive, I've been mentoring people. Yes. But it was one of those things where should I have someone else?
Right.
And it was interesting. I said, nope. If I haven't absorbed enough from the 8 mentors I've had, then there's a leak somewhere. But and it's great because I feel every time that I'm there, all the way from that dean of students to here's how you use a mentor. Sometimes, I'll make mistakes. I make a lot of mistakes, and I'll call upon the Dead Mentor Society. And I'll call upon them and say, talk me down from DEFCON 1. So I think this has been a pretty good interview, but there are times when I do interviews where I'm all over the place. And so recently, here's the story I give because it's kind of comical. So recently I've been calling upon Larry King. And I say, Larry, wake up. And he says, in his Brooklyn accent, Mark, I'm not even cold yet. Come on, what's the problem here? I did it.
Pretty good.
I did it again. What'd you do, Mark? Oh, I tell these stories. I get lost in the story. I said there's 5 points. I say 3 points. Mark, what do the hosts think? And I don't know if you'll say it, but a lot of them say, you can come back anytime you want, Mark. And so Larry says, you woke me up for this? I'm not even cold yet. Mark, put a sock in there already. Let me go back. Come on, leave me alone. And what happens is I just start missing them, feeling blessed that they cared about me. And what it is I just dive into the oxytocin.
Do you sense that I can't be the first person that feels this way? I talk a lot more usually in interviews, but I'm not besmirching you or saying you're talking too much. You say I've given you a long leash, but you say something meaningful and you pause. It's not like I don't have every opportunity to interject or say something or ask something. I'm kind of hanging on your every word. I mean, would you call that sort of is this some level of surgical empathy that you do during interviews? I mean, are you? Yeah.
Oh no, here's the deal, Zach. You're the one doing surgical empathy on me. You're saying normally I would interrupt and I'd ask, 3 factual questions and we got through to some, but Mark, it's okay. You're relevant. It's okay. I think as you're talking, if I'm feeling value from what you're saying, I think my listeners are too. So I think now you have to tell me your experience, because I think, I hope I didn't talk over you. What I felt is you were continuing to give me permission to continue. And Michaela Peterson, she gave me a nice compliment. She said, this guy's the best storyteller I've ever heard.
Yeah, I heard that. I was right. She's right.
Geez, if only some of them were true.
That would be messed up, man.
That would mess up. That would go.
Turn out that's just all. Yeah, none of these happen. Are you familiar with Chris Voss?
Yeah, we actually belong to an organization, and he, I know, never split the difference, and
yeah, right.
Tactical empathy, and he's brilliant. He really is. But I've never been about leveraging what I know.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not who I am, and I'm fine. I'm not. I'm not wealthy, but it's never been about money. And I've been able, I believe, to support my family okay. And but he's really, I really like him. And his tactical empathy is great. And in fact, I actually need to thank him because, I've known about him for a few years. And I came up with the word surgical empathy as a reaction to tactical empathy.
Interesting. So you knew what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, because tactical empathy, and I understand it. Tactical empathy is, and never split the difference, is here's how you can negotiate and win.
Yes.
Whereas for me, it's never been about winning. It's been about saving a life.
Yes. See, that's the issue that I had with, in his framework, it works, it's fine. That's the issue that I've had. I listened to his audiobook, and I've listened to in a few interviews. And of course, in a hostage negotiation, you have to use what you can use to get through to people but there was something about tactical empathy that was void of the kind of connection that you talk about, because he's talking about empathy as being something that it's not the same as compassion or anything like that. A sociopath could have empathy. And so he talks about tactical empathy as just, you leverage a person. I think that's how you put it. There's something much deeper, even if it's subtle, that you're talking about. That's why I think the things you say have landed for me in a comfortable way, in a way that when I listen to him, it's almost like I'm waiting for someone in the background to dupe me or something like that when he talks about tactical empathy. Do you know what I mean?
Well, look, it's recently I've been I blog a lot, and recently I've been a blog that I occasionally drop is how the tech CEOs, most of them are on the spectrum. Zuckerberg, Bezos, Musk, Sundar Pichai. I think the only tech CEO that has a capacity for compassion is Satya Nadella, because I think his son has either cerebral palsy or something, but you can feel that he cares. And one of the things that I've been talking about is that the tech CEOs, being on the spectrum, do not know how to emotionally connect with people, but they addicted the world to excitement. And years ago, oxytocin could actually increase your dopamine. Being close, feeling close, being tender, being patient with someone else's feelings. But right now, what it is adrenaline.
Mm.
And testosterone triggers dopamine. I'll share something. I did a presentation. I was part of a panel at Hollywood High School about 2.5 years ago. And it was an after-school presentation about stress. And the other panelists were terrific. There's a couple life coaches. And whenever I'm on a panel, I always say, let me be the last one to see if I can sort of synthesize something. And it was in the cafeteria. And by the time they got around with me, the pizza came in, and I figured, let's just pack it in, because I want that pizza more than I want to listen to me. But there I was going last, and there were 40 high schoolers in the cafeteria. And I said, I think this was great information. I think this was, but I could see they were already fidgety. They were restless. They wanted that pizza. So did I. And I said, I want to try something different. I said I was a co-moderator and co-creator and moderator of another documentary called Stay Alive, an intimate conversation about suicide prevention, which was mainly an interview with Kevin Hines, the fellow who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And it's a good documentary, that one and Tell My Story. They're great documentaries. They're hard to listen to. And so picture this, there's 40 high schoolers. And I said, I'd like each of you to think about the worst time you had in the last week. It's kind of like those 4 prompts. And they stare at me like deers in the headlights. I said, no, just think about it and raise your hand when you're there. So one by one, they raised their hands. And I said, you got it? Good. And I said, I'm going to give you a bunch of words and select the word that matches it. Anxious, depressed, angry, frustrated, alone, lonely, ashamed, overwhelmed, numb. And so I'm facing them. So there's about 2 or 3 rows of them. And so we start with the front row, and to my left, we just go from left to right. And one by one, they share the word. Afraid, angry, numb. And then when we finish it, I said, how did that feel? And they said, that felt wonderful. I said, that's because you didn't feel alone. And then I said, how many of you, I said, that was pretty negative. How come you felt better? And they said, because I feel alone a lot of the time. I said, here's the deal as a teenager. You live on 4 emotions: excited, bored, afraid, angry. That's all you know: excitement, boredom, fear, anger. And you just experienced something that was better. You experienced emotional connection. I said, write down those words. If you have a friend who's in a funk, you can say, this crazy psychiatrist came to the high school. And, just ask them, when you're feeling your worst, pick a word, because there's a lot of research that's called affect labeling, that when you can attach accurately the right word to how you're feeling, it lessens amygdala activation. And someone was standing behind me at the high school, and afterwards he comes up to me, he said, it was amazing what happened. I said, what? He said, I just saw their backs. He said, but when they went from one by one, he said, every time they were on the spot, they tensed their shoulders because they were on the spot. But then when they said their word, they relaxed their shoulders and they leaned in towards the panel. It was like dominoes collapsing. And so this is something you can do. I know a lot of places. We want to, and sure, accentuate the positive. Sure, accentuate mindfulness and all that stuff. But those don't necessarily increase oxytocin. And to me, sometimes when people are stuck and you're trying to rah-rah them, it's like putting lipstick on a pain.
Yes. Yeah, it's fair to say that that's something that we get wrong. And I'm talking about people in a helping profession again. Is that we feel sort of...
we feel compelled to fix so that we can actually write on our progress note that we're making progress. And I can see how it'd be difficult when you're writing your notes. Well, we went into hell together and they cried for about 30 minutes. And afterwards, we both felt kind of, kind of exhausted, but I think it was good. Can't write a progress note like that.
Yes. I acknowledged to my client how much life is worthless, and then we left. Would not be a good, a progress note. But that of course you would never put it like that. Yes, compelled to fix and compelled to remain positive, I guess, and that goes to what you were saying about sort of showing your emotional cards. Something that you did with your father, something that you did with the dean. That takes it a level deeper. I mean, they're really skilled clinicians, social workers, counselors who I know who can get pretty far with a person, but not in every situation. There are certain situations they feel stuck, and I really do feel that they're hesitant to show their emotional cards.
Look, and this is not to be critical of them. I'll tell you something though that I've wanted to do, but maybe you can help me out. Do a search for Naomi Feil, Gladys Wilson, Russia. Naomi Feil, Gladys Wilson, Russia.
You want me to do it now, or you want people to do it?
No, you'll do it afterwards, or you can put it in there. You can put it into the thing because to me, so Naomi Feil was the founder of something called validation therapy, and it's a 6-minute video, and about 30 seconds from the end is what I call the OMG jaw-dropping moment, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but to me, it's the power of attunement, the power of mirroring someone. I will just say, you will be astonished, and it can bring people back to life. And I so fell in love with Naomi Feil, who was probably 80 there.
I know what you're talking about now. I just realized what you were talking about. I actually saw that from your video. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. And so, but if people watch that and they're moved, I was so moved by it. I did an interview with Naomi Feil, who I don't know, she must be in her late 80s, and she has some cognitive issues. But I fell in love with her more because, she'd get a little scattered. But one of the things she said that stuck with me, she said, when demented people start blithering and we medicate them because it's agitating, really what's happening is when they're demented, they don't have this, they're just unpacking all the unfinished baggage of their life, and they just don't have the upper cognitive skills to suppress it out of consciousness. So basically what's happening is you remove that barrier to experiencing or feeling it, and they're blithering as a way to express the baggage of their life. But because they become unruly, we better shut them down and medicate them.
Right.
And it just, the way she shared it on the podcast, it just grabbed me in the heart. But I think it's a worthwhile video to watch. And if people have the same feeling towards Naomi Feil as I did, listen to the podcast on my Wakeup Call. I'll
link to all of these things in the show notes. I have a lot more I could ask you. I want to be respectful to your time and, give a good, a reasonable amount of time that people will tune into. I have one last question, and you can decide to unpack the question as you see that you might need to do later.
Go on, Zach. Okay, go on.
What made you smile today?
So what Zach's referring to is I have a podcast, TEDx talk called What Made You Smile Today? And actually, if you go to take the What Made You Smile Today challenge, if you look that up, it'll take you to my website. And 2 startup fellows in New York took the challenge, and they went around Manhattan asking people who served them, thanking them, and then say, what made you smile? And you'll also see there's a video clip where I did it with 1,000 Russians. And when I went to Moscow, they said, I hope you won't do any interactive stuff. I said, that's all I do. And I said, go up and talk to someone you don't know and ask what made you smile today. And I couldn't shut them up. But here's the power of it. In my TEDx talk, I talk about Arul. He's in India. And I think he's a poor young man. And, people reach out to me and again, I'm not about money. I'll forget. I already did this week. I'll forget to return an email to a Fortune 500 CEO, but I might return an email to someone in India who has nothing. So so we were having an email exchange, and I said, what made you smile today, Arul? And he writes back, no one as important as you has ever typed my name. And every day I go to my computer and I touch where you type my name. That changed his life.
And did it change yours? It must have, if you're still telling
Oh,
me.
yeah. I'm sharing it because it makes me smile. When I just sharing that, it just, I can feel it on my cheekbones, and it goes straight through to my chest. What made you smile today?
You know what? This is funny. What made me smile today is that I introduced that exercise to a student of mine who is a child. He gets stuck pretty often. And I didn't just do the exercise, I explained it to him so that he could participate with me in asking other people what has made them smile. He loved it. And he answered it very quickly. Like you just asked me, and it actually made me pause, and I had to think about it. I wonder if sometimes people are thinking that it's such a profound question, they need a profound answer. But that hasn't come to be the case. I asked this young child what made him smile today, and he immediately shouted something out, and he loved the exercise. So that whole phenomenon made me smile today.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we were on a mission, and but then COVID happened, and we may revitalize it. I think we own WMYST, whatmadeyousmiletoday.com.org, and there's an Instagram page, and there's a video of my being at breakfast with Larry King, and it's very short, and he was smiling but annoyed. It must be about 10 seconds, and he says, what made me smile today? He holds up a cup of iced tea. Nothing like a cup of iced tea, Mark. That made me smile. But I miss the guy, and good guy.
Is there anything that you think is brief, hard-hitting enough that we've missed that we should reference, or do you think that people can get the breadth of your work through the links that I'll leave in the show notes?
Well, I feel a sense of urgency in the time I have left in life to just share whatever I know wherever I can. Like you said, you never even knew who I was, and neither did Michaela Peterson, and the majority of the world doesn't know, and that's okay. But I collect quotes, and I have some great quotes from other people, but there's one that just blew them all away. And I'll leave you with this, because you'll say, the listener said you got to do a whole show on what he left you with. So there's someone I know named Dr. Shawnee, a woman Duperon, Project Forgive. And she refined the quote, but it's this: forgiveness means accepting the apology you will never receive.
That's brilliant.
Let it sink in, because it just let it sink in. And if listeners want us to do a show on that, we'll do it.
Perfect. I think in the audio version of this, I'll leave that quote and I'll just play music into some sort of an outro there.
There you go.
Dr. Mark Goulston, thank you so much for, first of all, responding. You mentioned I didn't know who you were before I had to start learning about your work. You certainly didn't know who I was, and you took a cold email from me. It's clear that you'll talk to anyone as long as you feel like you can pay it forward the way you have for me today. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.